Today I'm going to be talking about my experiences of employment, as there's just so much to tell really. And as we know, autistic people really struggle in various areas of employment, and I find it just really sad that the National Office of Statistics suggests that just 22% of autistic people are in any kind of work, even though the vast majority of us do actually want to work. So what's the problem? Well, let me tell you, there's plenty. So I've spent the last couple of weeks writing a list of all the jobs that I've had, and it's come as a bit of a shock really, because I thought I'd had maybe 30, 35 jobs, but I'm currently at 49. And knowing how my memory works, I'm pretty sure there's a few more in there somewhere. So the actual figure is probably breaching 50 now. And I just can't quite believe it really. Here's a fun fact for you. It's thought that currently the average person will have 12 jobs in their whole lifetime. So I'm just going to go through the types of jobs, or the areas that I've kind of worked in, and there's been some retail jobs, there's been 3 petrol stations, there's various phone sales jobs, which isn't the first job that would come to mind for an autistic person, is it? But yeah, there's been a few of those. I was a waitress for one night. I've been an optician's assistant or an optical assistant. I've done various admin roles, loads of customer service jobs. I've worked in recruitment. I've been a doctor's receptionist. I've also been a carer or a caring assistant at a couple of places. Communications, public relations, and events organisation. I've worked in various charities of different sizes and different kind of organisational structures. And I've been, and arguably still am, an artist. So yeah, that's quite the list, isn't it? And I have to mention that a few of these were actually temporary positions, or temporary to permanent positions, but the majority of them were actually permanent contracted jobs. And it's only now that I know that I'm autistic, I was diagnosed earlier this year, that I can really see why I absolutely was not suited to the vast majority of them. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of the industries that I've mainly worked in. So it's kind of sales and customer services, and I'll maybe talk about the charitable sector as well. But yeah, sales is, gosh, it's such a tricky area for an autistic person to work in, because there's just so many sensory challenges for one, and you have to have a really good understanding of people, and that's one area that we often struggle with, isn't it? And I suppose that I've had so many sales jobs because there were just loads of sales jobs around 25 years ago, and I'd say that they were relatively easy to get if you were able to go through an interview process quite well. And to talk briefly about interviews actually before I move on to the sales environments, I've always found interviews, although they're hugely nerve-wracking, I've always found them fairly easy to get through. And the reason for that is that they're quite formulaic, in that they always, or mostly anyway, follow the same kind of pattern, and conversation is actually very structured. So it's a very clear you and them balance of conversation. So you don't have to kind of interrupt at any stage, because you're always given space to present your answer. And I suppose I like just the formality of it. It's just, yeah, very clear for me to be able to understand the whole kind of dynamic between myself and the interviewer. I guess it is a little bit more tricky when there are more than one person on the interview panel. So I've always been very mindful about having to kind of make eye contact with each person. And of course, I really struggle with eye contact, but I've always felt that it was really important to do that in an interview, so that they feel that there's some kind of connection going on really. And some interviews have thrown me actually, where a test has been introduced for whatever reason. So I've had to I don't know, create a bit of text or work on a spreadsheet, etc. And yeah, those have certainly been a bit more tricky. But maybe I'll do a separate video on interviews and techniques I found helpful at some point. And yeah, let me know if you'd find that useful. So anyway, back to sales and sales environments. And I look back now and I think, how on earth did you cope? Because I found them all really, really difficult. And I don't know why I kept applying for sales jobs, knowing that I had issues with this kind of work. Well, I know why actually. I had to pay the bills, so I had to get a job. But yeah, it's been probably the trickiest area for me. So, in my experience, the people that are really good at sales are really outgoing, gregarious people, often people that don't mind telling a fib or two in order to make a sale or in order to make a commission, and who are able to get on with just about anybody. And let me tell you, I'm kind of none of those things really. So looking back at sales jobs, I have to tell you that none of them lasted very long at all. Maybe a few months. I don't know if I ever made it a year anywhere, because I just got to a point where I found it overwhelming, and I'd kind of reached a stage of burnout really. I just could not cope with that kind of work anymore. So yeah, just have to leave really. They're also the kind of jobs where targets and KPIs or key performance indicators or organisational objectives are really important. And if you're the kind of person who really doesn't care about any of that nonsense, then it's not going to act as a carrot for you in any way, shape, or form. And I just hated any of that kind of stuff. And I would zone out in meetings where all this kind of stuff was being talked about. And I'd see colleagues getting really excited about all of these carrots that they were given. And I just could not understand why they were remotely interested in any of this. So moving on to customer services now, there was actually quite a lot of similarities in working in sort of customer focused roles and sales roles, in that it required you being on the phone an awful lot of the time. And if you're not wholly comfortable being on the phone, that's going to cause some difficulties, isn't it? Now, I think because I've had to do this work so often in my life that I'm not actually too bad on the phone, provided it's in a kind of professional capacity. I absolutely hate talking to friends and acquaintances on the phone, which I've discussed in another video, but I don't mind kind of formal calls at all, and I suspect it's because I've just had to do it so often in a work environment. But what I do struggle with, and what I did always struggle with, is that I have a real thing with my hearing, and I know a lot of autistic people have this, that if I hear various conversations going on at once, I can't really discern anything between them really. They're all coming in at the same volume, and I don't know where to divert my attention really. And it's the same when I'm on a phone call, because the person that I'm speaking to on the phone is coming in at the same volume as a colleague who is on the phone to somebody else. So it's really, really kind of just a massive kind of sensory overload, and it really is confusing for my brain. So it takes me kind of longer to process that information. Also, I'd really struggle with customer complaints, and if you've ever worked in customer service, you know that customer complaints or dealing with customer complaints is a huge part of that job description really. And I really struggle if the other person is angry really. I'm so focused on their anger and their feelings that I struggle to think kind of creatively in the moment to try and problem solve for them, or to come to a solution that they're happy with. And the amount of times in my life that I've just had to hand over complaint calls because I just couldn't cope with it at all. I would find it just really emotionally overwhelming. And when we're thinking about customer services and sales, they're always in, well, certainly in my experience, they're always in large open plan offices where you can hear loads of other people and loads of other voices, and with that comes various sensory issues. Certainly for me, with regard to like perfume smells, I find those really overwhelming at times. A lot of people would eat in the office at lunchtime, so they'd prepare their food in the microwave or whatever, so there'd be smells from other people's food as well. And it makes me remember actually that there was one job that I had to leave because the smell in the office was so bad. They could never deduce where the smell came from. All the staff were aware of it, but because, I don't know, they'd all been working with it for so long, they were completely nose blinds. But I left after a few days because I just couldn't cope. It was so horrible, and I couldn't pinpoint it. I couldn't tell you what that smell was, other than the fact that it was absolutely vile. And also, when I think about some roles that I've had within customer services, there's been a couple of incidences where I've become friendly with a member of staff, and in both instances, I'm thinking about they were both women that would just start out as being friendly at work, and then that would progress into being friends outside of work. But then, I don't know, something would happen and then it would get just really weird. And I've had to leave a job because a relationship with a woman got so bizarre, really. I'll probably talk about this incident in a separate video about the workplace, which will probably be around the workplace and bullying and inappropriate behaviour. And I don't want to talk about any of that in this video because last week I spoke about school and bullying, and I just need a bit of a break from it, really. I'd be a bit of a masochist, really, if I kept talking about bullying every week. So I think I'm just going to leave all that for a separate video in the future at some points. So I'm just going to talk briefly now about the charitable sector, because I've worked in a few charities actually, and I've found them to be quite interesting places to work in. They're a very different vibe, I think, to the corporate world, or certainly the sort of customer service and sales positions that I've had. And I think when I look back at charities that I've worked in, I would suspect that a few people that I worked with may well be neurodivergent themselves. And I think it's a sector that perhaps attracts autistic people because you feel like you're doing good for the world, really. It's often a really meaningful cause, so I can certainly see why a lot of autistic people would be drawn to the charitable sector. And I think certainly the smaller a charity is, the less kind of corporate kind of feel that they have, and you can really see how small actions really matter in small charities. Every tiny piece of work can create a great ripple effect, really. So it does feel really worthwhile working in a charity. And I have worked for charities voluntarily as well, because it's just an area that I've been drawn to, certainly in the past. But I have to say that although there are some freedoms of working in a small charity, because you haven't got the same kind of working structure within the organisation, I think there's almost an unspoken expectation that you put in as much as you possibly can into your work. So I found that the work could be a bit overwhelming, because I felt like I had to put in a lot more time and energy and headspace, really, because I'd have to be more involved with decision making, and I don't know, I just felt that I would have to put in more hours than I was being paid for, because there was an expectation there, I think. And I think for autistic people, it can be really difficult to put boundaries in place because we often struggle socially. And yeah, I think that in itself can lead to burnout, and it certainly has for me. And I think certainly in smaller charities, a person will often be doing the work of many different people, because there isn't an IT department to call whenever your computer isn't working. There isn't a specific HR department to contact if there's an issue with a staff member, or you'll have to deal with an urgent request that's just come through on the phone, even though that's not your job description. And that in itself can be really stressful. So, one thing that unifies my experience in all of my jobs, and it's been a real problem for me as an autistic person, is I just have this overwhelming sense of being in trouble a lot, or feeling like I'm in trouble. And I think this has been really destructive for me within the work environments. And I would just go into a panic whenever a boss would have a one-to-one meeting with me. Whenever one would be scheduled in the diary, I would be panicking about it for days. Even though this is a normal practice for every employee to go through, I would just be panicking, thinking, what is it that I've done wrong? What are they going to be catching me out on? And it's something I've just never been able to get over. Also, I've always had a real difficulty with absorbing information, which has been really problematic in staff meetings, and particularly in meetings where I've had to take minutes, because there's just so much going on within a meeting kind of scenario. There's various voices, various ideas, various discussions going on, and I'd find it kind of overwhelming, really. And I would find it really stressful if I had to contribute to a meeting as well. I just would worry that I would fumble my words, that I wouldn't get my point across, that I just wouldn't even remember what I was on about while I was talking to whoever was in the meeting. I just really struggled with it, and I'm really glad to know that I'm autistic now, because I'd often wonder, why do I struggle with all these kinds of things and nobody else seems to? Everybody seems to know how to just do all of this. And that would also present itself in giving presentations. And thankfully, I've managed to avoid a lot of that kind of stuff in my jobs. But in some jobs, I've just not been able to get away with it. And I've had to turn up with other people's PowerPoint presentations because they've not been able to present themselves on that day, and present their presentation, and that's with very little preparation. And honestly, I don't even know how I got through it. I would find it just so overwhelming. I just hate public speaking so much, and I'd say that has really helped to absolutely wreck my career, even as an artist. Actually, a lot of artists find work by going out to give talks and workshops, etc. But because I really struggle with that kind of work, it's certainly meant that I've just not been able to achieve what I've wanted to achieve, really. And money's been a huge issue as well. And as we know, many autistic people, if they're lucky enough to be able to find work, will be working at minimum wage. And even once I was earning more than minimum wage, it's never been at a very much higher rate. And I've certainly never reached the national average. And that's it's so disheartening, isn't it? And many autistic people who desperately want to work will, in many cases, be forever on minimum wage, because negotiation is so difficult. I've never been able to go in to a meeting with a line manager to renegotiate my salary or to ask for a promotion, because I just wouldn't know how to do it. I just do not have the skill set in order to be able to do any of those things. I think negotiations over payments, it's a bit easier as a freelancer because it's all conducted by email, but certainly within a conventional work environment, to go into a meeting with a line manager, it's just something that I just would never have been able to do. So I've been thinking about, had I had a much earlier diagnosis of autism, would that have impacted on my working life in any way? And I think Certainly, I would have been looking at different jobs. I would have steered away from sales, I think, had I known that, I do have this difference from other people. I also wonder what would have happened had I disclosed that I was autistic, either on my CV or in my interview, how that would have gone down, really. And I suspect, given the preconceived ideas or misinformation about autism, certainly a couple of decades ago, then I don't think I'd have got the job in many instances. And also thinking about certainly some of the places I've worked in, if I'd have asked for special accommodations such as, I don't know, dimmed lighting, or certainly sitting away from bright windows, or having a booth all to myself so I couldn't hear other colleagues on the phone, I know I'd have just got short shrift had I asked for any of those accommodations, and I can only hope that employers have different thinking around this kind of area for autistic people or neurodivergent people, because just small accommodations can mean so much for us with sensory issues, and there's just a lot of learning to do, isn't there, in many cases. So I guess now I'm at a stage where I'm kind of working for myself, or I am working for myself. Although it's been really difficult for artists over the last few years, and I've talked about this in a separate video, but since COVID and Brexit and AI and the algorithm, life has become really difficult for artists, and certainly I'm one of them. And combined with the fact that I've got chronic illnesses going on, I can't go off and get a job. So yeah, it's been really difficult. I've been struggling with clé de serré, and PIP, as we know here in the UK, its disability benefit is extraordinarily difficult to get. So I'm in a bit of a limbo at the moment, and I imagine that lots of autistic people are in this situation as well. Just think it's shameful that just 22% of us are in any meaningful employment. Those numbers have to get better. But anyway, I think I've rambled on enough today, but I hope you found it useful, and I would love to hear your experiences of employment as an autistic person. I'd also be really interested to hear what you think your ideal job would be. I think that just would be fascinating to hear. And as with other Autism and videos, I probably will do a read through of comments on this video at some point. So yeah, just to make you aware of that really. So thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.